It's time for a coffee talk. It's Wednesday morning, about 9:30. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, well, it's a few stories about habits and such. So I called it Cleaned and Swept. Today is coffee talk number 145, and Peter was wanting to help me celebrate, especially once I come to 150. So he has made a special little video for the time when I get to Coffee Talk 150, but he did make something for me to show today. So if you saw, I'm drinking coffee from my Point 'em North mug. Oh boy, that's a lot of light shining there. You can kind of see it, Point 'em North mug. But this is a painting I did. It's actually hanging right up here on the wall. And it's one of those that I listed as available for purchase on my website. But Peter sent me this little video, and so I want to share that with you. Let's see. Make sure I got this in the right place. So here's a little video that Peter sent me as an ad.
Point some North coffee mug.
Oh, hold on. I gotta fix that. Here we go. I'm gonna get this figured out correctly in a minute. Well, I think I will. Not sure what happened there. Anyway, it's been fun having Peter getting into the production mode of doing things. So let's see if we got this right now. Let's try it again.
Point some North coffee mug. New 11 ounces and 5 ounces.
There, that's better. I'm getting confused by my own technology over here. So let's try that one more time.
Point some North coffee mug. New 11 ounces and 5 ounces.
So what he's doing, he was making a little ad for my coffee mug because he knew I'd made a new coffee mug. And he says, he's right, there are two different sizes for this mug. So over on jjgraber.com, if you can actually see this mug here, Point 'em North, there's 11 ounce one, and then down here is a 15 ounce one. So it's true, there are two different sizes of that mug that I have on my web store over at jjgraber.com. So that's my ad for the day. Let me come back over here. There we go. My office is currently pretty much a disaster, and it's because we're in the middle of last week was the opening nights for the play Esther that Stacy's been directing, and this week we've got 3 more shows left, one tonight and then Friday and Saturday night as well. And so that's exciting, and I'm glad we're doing those, but it's added to my tax season and theater season. And then next week we're going to the film festival, so I just have a lot of stuff going on. So my office is a disaster, but I am grateful for all the stuff we get to do. Hey Peter, we just looked at your video, that Point 'em North coffee mug ad.
Well, do you know what gave me the idea for it? Is because I've made a bunch of commercials lately. I'll just take a picture using the same app that I use to make the stop motions, and I'll make pictures of, I'll make ads. Like, I made, a cruise ad.
Okay.
A go to the mountains ad. I've made a lot of little ads.
So you're making little ads, and so then you...
So I know how to, do all the subtitles.
Yeah.
The pictures and everything. And then also, the erasing and other stuff
Yeah.
that I often do.
Hey Eric, we're live on Coffee Talk. What do you want to say?
Hi. He needs me.
All right.
Peter.
Thank you, Peter. So back in the 1980s in Tennessee, my parents built a log cabin back in the woods on 40 acres. And as the cabin was coming to completion, I would have been like 7 years old and then 8 years old. And I forget which summer it was, but one of those summers as the house had been being completed and Dad had been doing a lot of the finish work, there were leftover lumber and stuff that I went out behind our house, and I had seen them. I had watched the adults, pour the concrete and do all of that, and my grandpa oversaw a lot of that work, and the Amish men in the neighborhood would all come together and we'd have work days, and so I had watched the house being built, not hired out built, but like a lot of the house was built by us, our family and friends and our neighbors. We built the house, and so I thought, well, I could build a house. And so I started with some pieces of lumber and I laid them down and I made a little platform. It was probably largest would probably been like 4 feet by 4 feet that I made this little thing. And so having built that, and my sister Ruth helped me, and we nailed in the boards and we got it all there, and so it built a house. And so then we started talking about what we wanted to build. So as I'm thinking about this little house as a 7-year-old, I start imagining and daydreaming all the things that I could ever do in that little house. And I just remember thinking about who all I decided that in order to have enough room in the house, we'd have to make like a two, have an upstairs as well, and maybe even bigger than that. And so I started imagining having people over, and I would think, well, my sister Ruth could have her friends upstairs or downstairs, and I would be in the other part with my friends. And then I started thinking about all the friends we'd have there and what all we would do, and my imagination would just run wild. And one of the times when I got disciplined for completely not doing my work was because I was daydreaming about that particular thing. I was there daydreaming, and I would just daydream and daydream and daydream about what it was going to be like when I finished this house. And one day I actually tried. I went out and I had found a long piece of wood, a nice long strip. It was probably like a 1x3 or something, maybe a 1x2. And I thought this would make a good corner post for my house. And so I remember going out there with a hammer and a nail, and Mom had a little, probably a 10-ounce hammer that was the house hammer, and so she had that one in there. And so I had gotten that hammer because it was the easiest one for me to use. I'd gotten a few nails, and I found this board, and I went out to this little platform in the backyard. And so here was the flat platform, and then I took that upright and stuck it on there and tried to figure out how I was going to nail this. And so at 7 years old, I was running out of options. I didn't understand how to. I thought, well, maybe I have to nail it at an angle. And I tried that. But that was very difficult to do because I had to hold the board upright and hold the nail at an angle and hammer it at the same time. And I remember finally getting one of the uprights. And I think I brought several of the uprights with me out there. But I finally got one of them to stick. And so it was standing there, one little piece up. And then I just ran out of like how to do it. And so it was too hard to do. So instead, I just started imagining what it was going to be like once it was done. And so I started spending a lot of time just out there daydreaming again. And I don't know how many hours I spent daydreaming on that one little platform in the backyard in the hills of Tennessee, and how many people I hosted in my little house, and how much the Sunday afternoon popcorn and apple cider that I imagined we drank and ate, and how much I just enjoyed the concept of being out there, all while not making any forward progress on the little thing because I'd run out of space. And so even at 7 years old, though, that began sort of a habit of mine that if I ran into something very difficult, I would let my mind go and daydream about something more happy. Whether it was, in this case, where I would daydream about what it was going to be like when I was finished, or whether it was just something completely different. But I found this throughout my growing up years, that there were many, many times when I would bump up against something that I didn't quite understand, and I lacked the whatever that is, that would have allowed me to go to my dad or to another adult and say, hey, I'm trying to do this. How am I supposed to do this? Because had I asked my dad, he could have told me, oh, and he had plenty of scraps around, so he wouldn't have been like, oh no, don't use these scraps. He had plenty of scraps that we were allowed to play with, and he could have shown me that I could put one piece of my lumber flat, and we could lay it down, and we could have nailed it together down here, and then set it up, and then nail that piece to the floor. He could have explained that to me, but I never thought to ask him. I just was out there looking at this one piece and that piece and just going, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I tried, and finally I was like, this is hard. And so off I went into fantasy world where I daydreamed. And I felt like in some ways that became a way for me to cope. A lot of my growing up years, I would either read a book about something else, and I just remember the thrill in my, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, those years, maybe even younger, but I would read a book where someone was being successful. And we had quite a few from an author who would just write stories of these young men who went and made good in the world, where they overcame very, very difficult life situation and were successful in life through hard work and innovation. And they would get out there and they would do hard things. And I would read that and be like, oh, that's so awesome. And so instead of then translating that over and going out and doing the hard things and overcoming, which I did to some extent, but in some areas of my life, I just would imagine what I was going to do. So I spent quite a bit of life imagining what I was going to do in the future. And so when an opportunity would come up and someone would say, hey, let's do this, or there's an opportunity to do something, sometimes I would agree to do it, but then in my mind I would just start imagining what it was going to be like and what all the options were and how many different things we could do with it. For instance, even this very week with our stage production, months ago, when I realized that I was going to be helping design and build the set as the tech director for this show, I began looking for options of what we could do for the stage. And one of the things that I wanted to do was, in the way I was designing the backdrop, I thought, now wouldn't it be awesome if I could light the backdrop, and I had a very specific lighting scheme that I wanted to do. Well, there was no way with the current design of the stage to actually put in my lights. I would have had to redesign our stage, and I could have 6, 7, how many months ago would that have had to have been? Like last summer, at the beginning of the theater class, I could have said, here's what I want to do to the stage, and then they would have adjusted all of their blocking and all of their choreography to the stage, whatever the stage shape was that I was making. But I didn't at that point because I didn't understand exactly how I was going to do it. So I just put it off and I waited. And so then, time goes by, and eventually there was no more time to actually go and make the stage that I wanted to make. And so I think about that a lot of times. It's like, well, here, I'm just going to show you this picture. This is the stage. It's not the best photo. They took some really good photos. This was a photo from Tech Week. But if you look on this picture, here in the back, these guys right here, the Persian Archers are here in the background, and they look a lot better if I can front light them from the bottom and just shine a little light on them up from the bottom. And I would have loved to do that. However, in order to do that, I would have needed more stage this way. I would have had to do several different things. And so I think about that. And the reason I bring this up is because suddenly we were coming up on Tech Week, and I was finishing out this and just getting the stage up there and getting it together and just finishing it out. And it wasn't that I was spending hours and hours and hours daydreaming about what all else I could do, but I also I have sort of a way in which sometimes instead of doing the thing that I need to do, I will just go into the mode of imagining all the ways that I could do the thing. And this becomes for me, a sort of an out, right? Where I'm just imagining, I'm just fantasizing, and I'm not actually doing And so many times I'll be shocked when time suddenly is here to do something and I still haven't prepared for it the way I wanted to, because I took a lot of time to plan, to imagine and daydream what I could be. But if I don't take immediate action, so when I married Stacy, what really impressed me with her is when we would say we're going to do something, she would like start right then. She would immediately start doing it. And so this both impressed me, and then it also I'd be like, come on, just like chill a little. Like, do we have to immediately start the hard work? And yes, actually, it helps a lot when we do immediately start the hard work. But it would like annoy me that we would say, here's what we're going to do, and she'd say, well, if we're going to do that, then we better start this now. And so I was like, okay. So it changed my life getting married to Stacy. But I'm still finding these spots where the well, it might be a perfectionist mindset. Mom's is just chatting over there saying some of us call this a perfectionist mindset. It might be, and I might be putting it off. But it's also there's a little bit of something more to that, where it's the same thing where you think I'm gonna go outside and go hunting, or I'm gonna go hiking some big mountain, but right now it's cold outside, so I'm gonna sit here and sip my coffee. And so there's a little bit of something besides perfectionism in there too. So you might call it a perfectionist mindset, but I think it's also just it's when you let your body value comfort over achievement. You also get into this sort of mindset that I'm sometimes in. And so it's not that I'm like, when I actually get to the work and I'll work really hard and I'll do amazing things. That's always the part that amazed Stacy. She'd be like, I don't understand you. Like, you will wait to do something, and then when you do it, you do it amazingly. So anyhow, here's where I went with it today, though. I was thinking in terms of when we're trying to accomplish something, it requires two things. It requires both my schedule this week, for instance. I am trying to finish, I have taxes to do right now that I've been working with and getting those things done. I have next week is the film festival, and we have the theater going on. So I have a lot of things on my calendar, plus everything with the church and everything with the actual documentary and other work that I'm doing. So I have a lot of things on my desk. And as I'm trying to work through these things, I have to make this was my list that I made this morning, where I said, okay, so here's sort of the things that I need to do before Saturday. These things have to happen this week so that next week can be a success and I can be at rest while we're there. But what will happen is the simple little truth that if I'm doing one thing, I can't be doing something else. And so physically, me being present here means I'm absent in all the other places. And so that little bit is really important for me to think through and be like, okay, I can only be present in so many places. So how many places can I be present at? And then how can I work it so that I'm really present while I'm there? So that I'm not like there, but stressing about things elsewhere. I need to be there, be 100% there, and then finish what I'm doing there, and then check out of that and go to the next thing and do that. And so it always reminds me too of this, the parable that Jesus spoke in Matthew. And it's not even so much a parable as an observation from Christ, who is able to see the spirit world. And he shares this bit, and it's over in Matthew chapter 12. And he has this, he's talking that the scribes and Pharisees just came to him and asked for a sign. And he said, there's not going to be any sign given to you except the sign of Jonah, who spent 3 days and 3 nights. This is in Matthew 12, verse 39. He answered and said to them, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. And then he says this, he says, the men of Nineveh will rise up in judgment with this generation and condemn it, because they They repented at the preaching of Jonah, and indeed a greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will rise up in judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and indeed a greater than Solomon is here. And then he goes into this little, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's fairly well, this one, I often think about this, what he's about to say. He says, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it also be with this wicked generation. So Jesus is making a statement about the generation of Jews that were rejecting him. And so I thought about this multiple times, is there, the men of Nineveh, when Jonah preached, they had to stop doing a whole bunch of things and start doing a whole different set of things. When they repented, they stopped everything. They were in sackcloth and ashes. It changed their behavior. The queen of the south, when she wanted to be present with Solomon and hear his wisdom, she had to leave her courts and her palaces and dwelling places, and she had to travel many days to come up to be with Solomon, to be physically present. She had to change what she did. So she had to leave one space and go into another one. And then he goes into this whole thing, and it's basically the Pharisees of his day were so busy with what they were doing that when the Messiah showed up, they didn't have room to spend time with him and to understand who he was. But they were very busy, some of them, very, very busy keeping the law and doing all of these things. And so the picture that he gives was that of a house that is cleaned and swept. And I think of that picture sometimes for myself, and I know that other people will struggle with this, whether you're dealing with fear or lust, or just like in my case, when my life is full of daydreams that are really not being useful for the kingdom. I'm just daydreaming. I can't just say, stop it, and stop daydreaming. Or like if someone is living in fear all the time, you can't just say, stop it, and they stop living in fear. Or if someone is dealing with lust, and you say, stop it, and they just stop it. You can't just clean and sweep the house and just stop it. Eastern meditation will try to get you to empty yourself. But Christian meditation wants us to fill ourselves with the Word of God and with His presence and Spirit. So there's a difference here. And I think about that a lot of times when I'm trying to change my habits. Like, for instance, let's see. Oh, you can kind of see my couch over here. So I've had different morning routines in my life. And one of my morning routines that I never intended to be a morning routine happened with right over here. And it was the previous couch especially. And now this one is sometimes a little bit, I have to be like very cautious. So what'll happen is I get up in the morning upstairs. I come downstairs to do my Bible reading. Well, it can be cold outside. It can be kind of chilly in the house. Sometimes. And so I will come down, and especially in the morning, like right now, I love the temperature that our downstairs stays at, because once I'm up and moving, it's great. So over here, I have a little rebounder, and I can actually do some workout stuff right in this room where I can listen to music or Bible on audio Bibles or messages, and can do it right here. However, many, many times, and I'll just slip into this routine where I will come downstairs and I will sit down, and it'll be a little bit chilly, so I'll pull the blanket over my shoulders. And so then I'm just sitting there. And so then if you're sitting there all warm and toasty and you're reading or listening, it's really easy when you first get up in the morning to just, at least for me, to drift back off again. And so I will find myself in a position where my morning routine becomes getting up and coming down and like taking a second nap almost before I actually start the day. And so I don't like that morning routine. But for my body to stop doing that, I have to plan, what am I going to do instead? So I can't just come down and be like, no to the couch. entirely. I have to say yes to something else and get involved with, jump right in. And this is why some people will leave the house first thing in the morning and go to a gym, is just to replace what they're doing. Now, I work from home, and so I have at times gone to the gym. I don't do the other gym stuff. I usually just go swimming at the gym because that was my favorite workout in the gym. I don't like all the other ones very much. I can go walking. I can go biking in the summertime especially. So I have a lot of ways that I can replace one activity with the other. But I find that very, very necessary, where I can't just stop something. I have to fill my life with things. And so this reminded me, this whole passage where where Jesus says that, it's like an evil spirit who leaves the house. And he goes many places and he comes back looking. And what does he find? He finds the house where he was in, and it's cleaned and swept. And so, but it's empty. So it's all prepared. It's all neat. And so this is the picture of us if we're just trying to not do bad things. If we're just trying to not have any bad habits. If we're just trying to be empty of the other things. As a little kid, when I was dealing with the daydreaming, I had to figure out how to fill my mind with something else. And so what I discovered was, and I made this discovery many, many different times in different ways, but was like to actually plan an event, and then to actually go do that event, and then to actually come back home and share and talk about that event was way more rewarding than to just sit somewhere and imagine something. And so as much as imagination is a blessing in my life because of storytelling and for writing for me and for filmmaking and all the things I do that requires my imagination, I have to keep that thing in check. It's not the only thing I have. And so I remember my friends Mary and Eli and I, we made a plan to go on a camping trip. We went on that camping trip. When we came back, we talked about the camping trip at length with our friends and family. And that was way better than to just sit around and talk about what all we could do in the woods. And so it's the replacement of saying, well, I can't, if you don't want the one thing, you have to replace it with something else. And this is such a obvious thought that people have been saying it for, thousands of years. Aristotle said something along the line of nature abhors a vacuum. And that idea, and I've heard that phrase my whole life, so I went looking for it this morning. Who said this? And so apparently Aristotle said it, but also there was this fellow by the name of, I'm going to butcher this name, Rabelais. In the 1500s, he wrote about it also. He put the phrase in there, nature abhors a vacuum, in several of his books in the 1500s. And then, and so we have these, but it's been a common idea that nature doesn't want a vacuum. And so if you think about that, it's like if you go out in the woods and you bring in a bulldozer or whatever, and you scrape off a space and you say, I'm going to build a house here. Well, if you just leave, you scrape off the spot and then you leave, when you come back a year later, 2 years later, it will be so overgrown with things that nature just filled it in with. There will be mullein plants growing. There will be a lot of stuff just growing in that what you had scraped clean. And so if you're going to build something, you have to clean it and then build immediately, and then plant something else if you don't want what was there originally. And so it's amazing how quickly a place will get filled. Same with our life. If we say, oh, my schedule is changing, I now have 3 extra hours on this day to do something, and I'm going to be at home, and I can't wait until all the things I can get done in those 3 extra hours. Well, unless we actually do something in those 3 extra hours, if we just leave them empty for a while, they will be filled, but not with the things necessarily that we want them to be filled with. And so it's necessary to make sure that we are filling with the right thing. And this is how I think of my Christianity a lot, is that the Lord wants to fill me. And so when Psalm 1 says, blessed is the man that does not walk in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of the scornful, there's 3 things I don't want. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. So now instead of walking in the counsel of the ungodly, or standing in the path of sinners, or sitting in the seat of the scornful, I am delighting in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. That is an actionable bit of intel right there that I can go do something with. So I want to fill myself with his word. And so instead of just imagining vain imaginations or even just working hard to keep things clean, I want to fill myself with the word of God and with himself. And I don't want to just accidentally go around. Henry David Thoreau said this, and the more I think about it, I feel like it's a bit of a horrible quote. I know what he means, but look at it. It says, nature abhors a vacuum, and if I can only walk with sufficient carelessness, I am sure to be filled. I think he means if he can walk in the woods with sufficient carelessness, he can be filled with nature. And so I think from that perspective, you're like, okay, that's kind of nice. But here's the thing is, I don't want to walk with sufficient carelessness to just be filled with whatever's around me. I actually want to make sure that I'm intentionally choosing to allow my creator and the creator of the universe, the creator of nature itself, to fill me with himself. That's what I really want long term and short term. So I don't want to just clean this house. I want to have it full of the right things. And so those are some of my thoughts for today. I'm grateful that the Lord gives us such beautiful pictures like the one in Matthew 12, where he explains to us this picture of the Spirit wandering around looking for some place and then coming back and saying, oh, the house is empty and clean. So this is why you don't want to just get rid of a habit. You want to replace it with something good and rebuild with a good habit. So those are some of my thoughts for today. Blessings. Thanks for joining me. I will see you, I think next week we'll be live streaming from the film festival in Georgia. See you then.